Hi, everybody. Today we are discussing the Chinese Exclusion Act. So, our question for today is what factors led to the Chinese Exclusion Act? Okay. So, here are the standards again. They're the same pretty much from yesterday because Chinese are just another group of immigrants that were coming in. So, it's going to be the same standards that we kind of looked at yesterday and looking at those racial and ethnic groups and settlement and expansion and American dream. We're going to delve more into the American dream concept today. So, one thing you'll be discussing in class is why are some groups treated differently than other groups in America? So, we like to think of this as just like race, but we can look at this on many different characteristics. Race, religion, sex, sexual orientation, where you live, socioeconomic status, which is just where you fall in the class system, like rich versus middle class versus upper middle class versus those in poverty. You can even look at age discrimination, which many of you probably feel like you feel treated differently because you're a teenager, as opposed to how you were treated when you were a kid, as opposed to how you will be treated when you become an adult. So think about as we go through this and as we've talked about immigrants and migrant groups, why some groups are treated differently than other groups in America. And what are those reasons behind that? Because there's a lot of times history behind that different treatment or that mistreatment as well. So this is a video clip that kind of introduces the Chinese Exclusion Act. and the concepts behind it and introduces and goes over it very briefly that's linked into this slideshow that you can look at your own leisure. So the melting pot, this term is America is referred to as a melting pot. So this term really talks about how America is a nation of immigrants. So all of these cultures are blending into one unique American culture. The only Native Americans are Native Americans. Everybody else is an immigrant, whether by choice or by force, which we know some groups were forced into America. Okay, so this, when you look up like melting pot, this is a really good political cartoon. And as you can see, I love my political cartoons because they have a lot of symbolic reasons for like personifying and giving us examples of all of these different things that are going on in history at the time. So this is a really good visual representation of the melting pot term. Okay, so we've got obviously representing America, and we've got all of these different types of people in this pot, and they're all together to make up America. Now, unfortunately, though, a lot of times, especially in this era, certain groups are excluded from that American identity. We fast forward to 2020 and a lot of different groups are included because we're such a multicultural society. But at the time, Asian Americans were greatly excluded from this melting pot, this American culture, this American unity. So even though if immigrants often held on to a lot of their traditions, children became more Americanized or assimilated. Remember, we talked about assimilation is the dropping and changing of your culture to be a part of the dominant culture. And for our purposes in American history, when we looked at the Dawes Act and immigrants, Americanized. So nativism is this term. So immigrants faced a lot of hostility and hatred, some more than others as they came over into America. So nativism is this idea that native-born white Americans are superior to new immigrants. So just like racism is belief that your race is the best, sexism is the belief that your sex is the best, ageism is another term, which basically means that you think that your age group is the best. Nativism is this idea that native-born Americans, white Americans, are superior or better than these new immigrants coming into the country. A lot of this is for a lot of different reasons. Some of these reasons are still true today as to why a lot of immigrants face a lot of hostility. So steep competition for jobs. We've got all of these jobs that are created, and now we've got all of these immigrants coming into America and taking the jobs. So we've got this competition for jobs, religious and cultural differences. So a lot of these different groups have vast cultural and religious differences. So many different beliefs. And we know that a lot of people feel very strongly about their belief system, their faith, their religion. And so that can cause a lot of tension, because if you feel strongly about your faith and your faith is directly against what my faith says, that's going to cause some conflict. Cultural differences. We talked about like hardships that immigrants and migrants have to face last week. And so we think about like language barriers, dress, food, like all parts of your culture, and rituals, things like that. There's also a lot of people who don't like their Catholics or people of the Jewish faith, so anti-Catholic and anti-Jewish feelings, and hostility toward Chinese laborers, which we're going to delve a little bit more into in just a second. Ethnocentric. So ethnocentrism is this feeling that your race or ethnicity is superior to all others. So it ties in with this nativism. So if you've ever heard anybody say that someone's like egocentric, they really love themselves and think everybody else is the worst. Ethnocentrism is the same thing. This is thinking that your race, your ethnicity, where you're from is better than everybody else. Xenophobia is the fear of foreigners. And yes, it is a real fear. So there are some people who are genuinely frightened and afraid of foreigners as well. So anti-Asian sentiments. They have a very extremely different look from many of the other immigrant groups that are coming into America. Physically, their hair is very different. They dress very differently. They've got a lot of different cultural values and things like that as well. So they felt there was this feeling that they could never assimilate. And remember what assimilate means. It's becoming a part of the dominant culture. So there was this idea that because they're just so different, they're never going to be able to assimilate into American culture and American society. We're not going to be able to Americanize them. The Chinese Exclusion Act is passed in 1882. And it limits Chinese immigration. In 1902, they banned all Chinese immigration until 1943. Asian immigrants had segregated schools. So we know segregation just means that they're separate from all of the others. So segregated just means separate. The Gentleman's Agreement was passed, and this limited Japanese immigration between 1907 and 1908 as well. So there was a lot of hostility for many of the other groups, but the Asian immigrants faced it the most. All right, so this timeline here, we're going to kind of look through. This is the timeline of Chinese immigration and exclusion. So as we're looking through this timeline, what happened between the 1860s when the Chinese were welcomed and 1882 when they were excluded? So gold is first discovered in 1848 in California, and many Chinese arrived to mine for gold. So that's kind of the start of this Chinese immigration. Okay, things are cool. 1850, foreigner miners tax mainly targets Chinese and Mexican miners. So we see some of that discrimination starting. 1852, we have a huge wave of Chinese immigrants coming to America. 1854, the court rules that Chinese cannot give testimony in court. So little discrimination kind of creeping in little by little. 1862, the Chinese Consolidated Benevolent Association was formed. In 1865, they started to recruit Chinese workers. And so this is where it's like, okay, cool, we'll deal with the Chinese. We're going to work with them. We'll let them work for us. The Transcontinental Railroad is completed in 1869. Remember, there's an addition that comes later, but the first one is completed then. 1870, California passes a law against importation of Chinese and Japanese women for prostitution. So we got some crazy stuff going on there. 1871, Los Angeles, anti-Chinese violence, 18 Chinese were killed. In the Panic of 1873, there's a start of an economic downturn that lasts through the decade, and it was blamed on the corrupt railroad companies. Well, let's think. Who helped build the railroad? Many of the Chinese helped build the railroad. So we see little by little, more little random things are happening that's causing distaste for Chinese. In 1877, there's anti-Chinese violence in California. In 1878, the courts ruled that Chinese are ineligible for naturalized citizenship. So this is a process that they're supposed to be able to go through. You're supposed to, as an immigrant, be able to come over, go through the process, pay the fees, and become a naturalized citizen. But the court denies them that. In 1880, approximately 106,000 Chinese are in America. California passes a law that says no interracial marriage, again, picking on the Chinese and a lot of other different groups. Then the Chinese Exclusion Act is passed in 1882. It prohibits Chinese immigration. And in 1 year, immigration drops from 40,000 to 23. And then lastly, the last two, in 1885, Rock Springs, Wyoming, anti-Chinese violence happens there. And then in 1892, the Geary Act extends Chinese Exclusion Act. So we see how little by little, it's like we use the Chinese, we like them for a little bit, sort of, we don't like them. Then we are like, well, they can work for us. But then it's like there's issues that keep coming up. All right, so Chinese Exclusion Act is passed in 1882. This prohibited Chinese laborer immigration. So it banned all entry of Chinese except students, teachers, merchants, tourists, and government officials. So what do we notice about all of those groups that can come into America? Well, they either benefit America or they add to something. So students, they're going to come here and learn from America. Teachers, they're going to come here and bring their wealth, their knowledge here. Merchants, those are business owners. They're going to bring money. They're going to bring their businesses. They're going to help America grow. Tourists are going to come and they're going to spend money while they're here. And government officials, that's going to be more of being able to work with each other. So more for diplomatic reasons. So it limited the civil rights of Chinese immigrants already here in the U.S. It prohibited them from becoming citizens. And many of them were, even citizens, were very afraid to visit China because they were afraid they could never come back again. So we also have that fear of movement. Like, I can't even go home, see my family, because I might not be able to get back in. Are we seeing some repeats of some of these things in today's America? Okay, so today's activity is surrounded by this question of what is the American dream? So what is the American dream? We talked a little bit about this yesterday. And not only what is the American dream, but is it the same for everybody? So we talked about how some people's American dream is different from others. Some people have really simple American dreams. They just want to be able to live a good life. Some people have American dreams where they want wealth, they want to be rich, they want this, they want that. So it can differ from person to person. But overall, there's this American dream that exists, and that term is. So today's assignment is it's a writing assignment. So you're going to answer the question in 1 to 2 paragraphs. So the question is, do immigrants have access to the American dream? So remember, you can have your opinions, but you have to back them up. So do immigrants have access to the American dream? Yes or no, and support that with some facts. So use information from all the discussions we've had, knowledge you have about immigration. So maybe you've got personal knowledge, you know immigrants. You are in a family of new immigrants into America. Use that. Also, make sure to discuss experience of immigrants today. So don't just focus on immigrants of the Gilded Age. Also discuss, what about immigrants today? Do they have access to the American dream? How? Why or why not? So that is the assignment for today. And you're just going to answer this in 1 to 2 paragraphs.